So what age do you think is the great age to start kids with sex education? And like what type of sex education do you think you should start kids with?
It's a great question. My answer is birth.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I personally agree with that too. Like, I mean, if you just normalize talking about sex, it doesn't become this weird, taboo, scary thing.
Interesting. So what does that mean then, in terms of like the early ages and their exposure to sex talk?
Yeah. So I think that we get tripped up on this idea that talking about sex means talking about how to have sex and different types of sex and where you put certain body parts, which seems ridiculous.
Right.
You know, I like to think of this conversation about sexuality as literally something that we have from birth to death. I mean, it is the core of who we are. I mean, sure, it includes at some point our sexual feelings and desires and our sexual orientation, but it also is about how we identify and express our gender.
Right.
Body development, our body image and our self-esteem as it relates to our bodies, the roles we communicate and how we operate in relationships, even friendships, gender roles. There's so much to it. And if we stop looking at it as, you know, putting certain body parts in certain places, we start to realize that it's something that we're figuring out all of the time. So when I say sex ed begins at birth, and I say it acknowledging that I have teenagers of my own who have actually been the recipients of this sort of philosophy. You know, it's meant that we've always talked about correct terms for body parts. We always encourage them to look at lots of different types of families and family structures. We never hid how pregnancies could be created. We allowed them to play with toys and wear clothes and have hairstyles that were beyond what was expected of them. And I think that all of those things lay the groundwork for a really healthy sense of yourself and equally as important, respect for those who might be different than you.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's so wonderful.
Oh, I completely agree. I think that's such a great philosophy. And I come from a super repressed background. I was taught abstinence only sex education and still lost my virginity at 13. Whole ridiculous thing. So now as an adult, I'm like, yeah, no, if we just teach kids from like an early age, like here's what you should expect. When I got to go visit my friend or my family down in Belize, I took a bunch of like the New York City free condoms that they give. Like I took a big bag of them and I gave some to my 16-year-old cousin. And then I also gave some to my uncle because he has 15 kids. And I was like, yeah, you know, sir, it looks like you did not have the right sex education. Let me show you how this condom works.
And I love that because I mean my kids I've worked with the Trojan condom brand for a long time as you know in the spirit of full disclosure on their sexual health advisory council. So ever since my son is almost 16, ever since he was born, I get a lot of products that are sent to our apartment all the time. So you know we used to open them together and like thousands of condoms would spill out and we had so much fun talking about them and thinking about them, not so much in terms of sex products, but that they're actually health products, right? It's a symbol of respect and responsibility. And the sooner we can change that framework, as opposed to thinking of them as something that makes you not trust your partner or that there's something wrong with you or your sexual health,
right?
You know, I think the better off we are. And I think, Vivica, to your point earlier, also this idea that when we talk about sex, we're also talking about our body's capacity for pleasure and masturbation and not necessarily just about partners, but figuring out who you are and what you can do on your own.
I love that. I love, though, the way that you just phrased that about how sexual protection is about health. And it's about caring about your partners, and not just caring about yourself, but caring about your partners. How do you think the pandemic has changed people's perspectives on how our own personal health decisions have effects on other people around us and people that we care about? Because it's been so interesting how living, you know, a sexually free lifestyle, you have to worry about, like, if you're protecting yourself, because then the next partner you sleep with, you have to be protecting them as well. But it's only people you're sleeping with. Now here's the pandemic, and it's like, if I'm not protecting myself by wearing a mask and socially distancing, and then I go home and visit my family, I'm exposing my family to things that previously I'd only be worried about exposing sexual partners to. And it's like, I think that people who maybe haven't lived more of a sexually liberated lifestyle are now more aware of this idea that we are so interconnected in our own personal health decisions, whether it comes to choosing whether to vaccinate or not. I grew up not vaccinated until in my adult age, and having to like study this and learn, well, why do we vaccinate ourselves? Are we just worried about our own selves and whether or not we're going to be exposed, or are we worried about our contribution to the greater health of our community? And do you think that the pandemic is changing people's perspectives on that in a way that maybe will have a positive impact on their sexual health decisions?
I sure hope so. The pandemic has really highlighted what most of us who are sexuality educators or public health educators have really talked about for a long time, right? Having these conversations about risk, what we are willing to take risks on, what we're not, how to navigate protection, how to navigate a partner, a friend, a parent who may have contracted something, and how does that impact our choices and how we communicate with that person, especially if we're sharing our bodies in some way. So I think that we've been practicing this for a long time, but as we know, humans have trouble with conversations they perceive to be awkward.
Yes.
It's the one thing. It's the thing that I've seen so much of in the last 5 years with my students. So I have the sheer privilege of being able to work in a lot of different schools. Whether it's co-ed or single sex or gender, religious, secular. Kids who have learning disabilities, specialized schools, that a lot of different places and a lot of different age groups. And the one thing that has become abundantly clear, and I do think that social media has played a role in some way in it, is that we have this perception that the way in which we communicate and express ourselves in a sexual or romantic way, it has to be perfect and cool and smooth, because so much of life seems to be manufactured and everything looks so filtered and lovely,
right,
that they're so concerned with asking questions, whether it's about consent, whether it's about pleasure, whether it's about, have you ever been tested for an STI or tested positive for an STI? They're so consumed with saying these things, but not being awkward. And I fear that awkward has become a bad word, instead of recognizing that vulnerability has always been a part of sex and sexuality, and that's okay.
Yes.
And there's a lot of value in being awkward and getting past it and teaching us resilience. But that's hard for a lot of people to navigate.
That's so amazing. And that's so wonderful, because I love the way you talk about it, being this lifelong journey, right? It's like, if you normalize these kinds of otherwise awkward discussions, and even if you're not necessarily having a conversation with a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old or an 8-year-old, they hear people talking about it in a way where they recognize that, like, maybe it's a little awkward, but it's much less awkward than if it's never talked about. And all of a sudden you're 13 years old or whatever. And it's like, now we're going to have to talk about the birds and the bees. And this is just as awkward for me as it is for you. So let's just do it and get it over with. And we'll never talk about it again. You know what I mean? It's like, the more people, the children are exposed to just the fact that this is happening and people are talking about it, and eventually they're going to talk about it and it'll be a part of their lives, I think that reduces the awkwardness. And that's why that's so important.
Thanks for checking out this clip from our show.
To watch more clips or full episodes, click on our profile below.
If you want to stay up to date on all of our new episodes and videos, click subscribe.
And if you have any ideas for future guests or topics that you would like to see us cover on the show,
leave us a message in the comments or connect with us on any of our social media channels at Funtime Program.
Or on our website at funtimeprogram.com.
We'll see you in the next one.
Bye-bye.